Hey, what's up, y'all? And of course, welcome to another Alternative Factuals video. So this episode, or this particular video, is going to be pretty important for the future of DC Comics. As many of you know already, DC Future State, they've already begun to release some, leaks and spoilers about, characters and their development, such as, the whole Batman debacle. With Lucius Fox's son. So before I dive into the details of all that stuff, please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're feeling. And without further ado, let's kind of just talk about this topic of Lucius Fox's son. So these are going to be one of these videos where, even though there's going to be panels on the screen, just because that's my format, and I'll try to have panels that somewhat related, but for the most part, DC Future State is not out yet at all, and not a lot of information is released as well. So all this whole video is basically just me giving my opinion and trying to give you some predictions of what I think is going to happen in terms of the future of DC and some of the controversy surrounding why people hate that Batman will be black in DC Future State. So let's kind of just, go on with the conversation. So DC Future State obviously is going to be a reboot, or an aspect of a reboot that's going to be taking place in 2021 in the new year. And because of this reboot, or supposed reboot, or this whole event, supposedly Batman is going to be Tim Fox. We don't know the circumstances that will completely lead up to it. We can speculate based on the events of Joker War and the fact that Bruce Wayne lost his company. Lucius Fox is the one who took over. So ultimately, this is going to be very interesting to see how Batman reacts to this, but also I want to figure out, or at least try and predict, why Tim Fox even became Batman, and not just simply from the story perspective, but also just from the writer's perspective and why they chose to do this. So we already know Lucius Fox has two sons, Tim Fox and then Luke Fox. We already know Luke as the Batwing. We've seen him already. He's someone who's been around. Everyone's perfectly fine with that. He's kind of just been doing his own thing, kind of been in stories, out of stories, kind of floating around, doing his own thing, perfectly fine, whatever. Now, Tim himself has been kind of estranged to the Lucius family for various different reasons that I'm not going to completely get into in this video, but ultimately, from the writer's perspective, at least from what I'm gathering based on the news and some of the information about them speaking about DC Future State and how it's going to change a lot of things, is that Lucius Fox has been very important in Batman's life, and he's not new. He's been around since 1979 Batman number, I think 306 or 307, by Lin Wayne and John Cownan. So Fox was mostly, as we already know, tasked with the business side of Wayne Enterprises, dealing with a lot of the ins and outs of the day-to-day life. But ultimately, he rose into popularity due to the whole Christopher Nolan The Dark Knight trilogy, where we saw Morgan Freeman. He took on the role where he was still running the business, but he knew who Batman was. He knew that Bruce Wayne and Batman were one and the same. He knew the intentions of Batman, what his goal was, and that's what put him in the spotlight, even though he had been around for, pretty much 60, 70 years already. So that was very interesting as is. Now, due to the success of all that stuff, with the Christopher Nolan Batman Dark Knight trilogy and all that stuff, obviously the comic book sought to kind of monetize on that, which is why they brought in, Lucius Fox and kind of based the character on the way that Morgan Freeman kind of developed the character, where he himself was very chill, very understanding, very charismatic. He himself was brilliant. He knew the ins and outs. He knew how to cover his tracks. He knew how to play the mind games we saw in the Dark Knight trilogy, where one of the employees thought that he found evidence that Bruce Wayne was siphoning funds, when in reality, he didn't, and he was on top of everything. So they sought to, monetize that, especially at, the New 52 in the Batman Return by Grant Morrison. So they definitely wanted to use that to kind of bring people into reading the comic books. But also, it's been more serious lately when it came to Lucius Fox, because basically we already know that Bane killed Alfred when it came to this whole, I think, Tom King's run recently. So obviously we know Alfred is not alive anymore, and he's basically, Lucius is pretty much the president of Wayne Enterprises. And the reason he's president was because, one, Bruce was kind of establishing him as that, but also Lucius was one of the most important people in his life, and he wanted to make sure he was taken care of. And this is outside of Catwoman, because you already know they were supposed to get married, didn't get married because of that whole Bane situation. They still were together. Like I said, I'm not getting into all that, but Joker War is what really spiraled the fortune into the public eye, because they kind of manipulated the funds to make it look like Bruce Wayne was this like terrible, scheming kind of guy. And even though he was proven innocent, the government still had their eye on Wayne Enterprises, which is why Lucius had to take over, thus Bruce Wayne kind of not having, his unlimited resource, his major superpower, which is white privilege and unlimited funds. So this is where I get into the part where we talk about Tim Fox. So in order to make a family important, Lucius himself has always been very, very important. Luke has been very important. Tim has been very important. Both of his sons are very important because, one, they carry the Fox's last name. Because he was introduced back in 1979, he became relevant. His sons became relevant as a part of the family because his sons are not stupid. Now, am I saying they're like genius level intellects? No, but they're highly intelligent, and they're able to strategically plan things, and they have a very adept mind when it comes to, making split decisions, and that's a gift that was passed down from their father. Now, so even though we know already that Luke wasn't this very first Batwing, he was definitely one of the most memorable people to wear it because, one, he was black. And he fought alongside Batman. He was able to kind of just match them and fight alongside them, and for the most part, that was just something that he did, and it happened, and it was kind of dope. It was kind of dope. But what a lot of people don't know, and probably is going to become very evident in the DC future state, is that Bruce Wayne actually had his eye on Luke's sons in general, because there were situations where I guess there was an African version of Batman that was being considered. Because Luke himself was a genius, fighting level prowess, and he was just very cool-headed, level-headed. But Lucius was not very fond of that, so that was something also as well that was kind of starting to lean into, kind of putting strain on the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Lucius Fox. So obviously that was a thing. But in general, Tim Fox shows very similar promise to the whole DC future state, as well as to his older brother, because of the fact that, like I said, Lucius Fox himself was a genius. Now, the point of me saying all of this, the point of me breaking down all of this, is to say this: the point of making Batman black in DC future state and making Batman Tim Fox is not simply just to race bend Batman. Don't get me wrong, as a black person, I don't like when they race bend characters, especially when it seems pointless. If this seems like there's no reason to it, if there's no rhyme and reason to it, if they're just doing it to kind of satiate particular set of readers that just happen to look like me, I don't support that. However, I think obviously we already know that this is not going to be permanent. Batman is going to go back to being Bruce Wayne. We know this ever since Batman was introduced way back in Batman #1. I don't even think it's Batman #1, but ultimately when we first saw Batman, it was just, we knew for a fact that he wasn't going to go anywhere. They're going to keep rebooting, they're going to keep bringing him back, and they're going to try new things in between then to tell stories, because at that point they're laying the groundwork for future stories. So if Tim Fox wants to be another superhero, well, people are going to come bring in the conversation like, okay, Tim Fox was Batman during DC future state, meaning he's capable of being a superhero. Batman has identified him as being intelligent enough, strong enough, and very much adept enough to become a vigilante. So basically, someone filling the role as Batman is not always a permanent situation. It's a way of developing them to use them for later stories. We've seen this situation with Damian Wayne. People knew that he's capable of being Batman. I think DC Zombies or Deceased or something like that, he's Batman right now. We already know that Dick Grayson was actually Batman for a short amount of time. And like I said, that was mostly just to develop his character, to develop both of these characters, where they knew, people always bring up in this conversation, like who's better, Damian Wayne or Dick Grayson. One of the first things they bring up is, well, Dick Grayson was Batman. Well, so is, Damian Wayne or, Tim Drake. People bring up conversations, who was able to be a better version of Batman in order to determine who was a better fighter or who was a better character when it came to these sidekicks. So someone becoming Batman doesn't mean, someone black becoming Batman doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay that way. And it's not necessarily just to simply race bait, but it's a way to build up a character, because DC has further plans with Tim Fox and the whole Fox family in general, with Lucius, with Luke. All these characters, they have something else that's going to be building up and they're using Tim to do it. They're using his name, they're using his experience, and they're using the Batman moniker to boost their notoriety when it comes to, you know, the crime fighting aspect of their family. Because when Bruce Wayne does come back, whenever that point is, ultimately we are going to not only know who Tim Fox is, but know that if he was good enough to be Batman, then he definitely is good enough to be a part of other stories. So maybe he might join a very clandestine group of crime fighters who works undercover, much like Dick Grayson did, where he stopped being Nightwing, he stopped being Robin, and for a little bit he was just working as like this undercover agent fighting crime under a different alias. So that's definitely a possibility as well. So we have to take in consideration, this is not simply just to raise Ben, but this is just to develop them, kind of give him a little bit more of a boost in his name, get people more familiar with his name. So that way, when these events take place, when they decide they need to use Lucius, they need to use Fox, they need to use Luke, not only are their names like full of different reputations and lores from, you know, storytelling that happened relatively recently and from the past, but ultimately just so we can kind of get a really well developed story and have some sort of backstory on why a future story is going to take place and why that character ended up in that possible scenario that it's going to happen in the near future. But let me know what you're thinking in the comments down below. Do you think this whole situation is a bad idea? Do you think they're just doing it to satiate the black audience? So just let me know in the comments, and I hope to see you later on. So peace.